Her dreams that night were vivid and strange. Images of ancient forests where humans and Sasquatch walked the same paths, communicated with the same understanding. Whether these were merely dreams shaped by her experiences or something more profound, some sharing of collective memory across the species barrier, she couldn't say. But she woke with a sense of loss and longing that transcended her individual experience, as if she had glimpsed a world of coexistence that had once been possible, but had somehow slipped away. The final day of her journey brought Sarah back toward the more frequented parts of the trail. With each mile, signs of Sasquatch presence diminished, gradually replaced by the familiar markers of human activity: boot prints in the mud, occasional bits of litter she conscientiously collected, carved, initials in tree trunks. The transition felt like moving between worlds, crossing an invisible boundary from one realm of existence to another. When she finally emerged from the trail into the parking area where her Subaru waited, the ordinary sight of cars and informational signs struck her as almost surreal after what she had experienced. A small group of day hikers were preparing to set out, checking maps and adjusting backpacks with the casual confidence of those entering what they perceived as a managed recreational space, rather than a living territory. As Sarah loaded her gear into her car, she overheard their conversation. Excited plans to reach scenic viewpoints, concerns about weather, jokes about bears and mountain lions. Not one of them mentioned or seemed to consider the possibility of encountering something beyond the recognized wildlife of the region. How could she ever explain what had happened to her? Who would believe an account of intelligent social beings living undetected in these forests? More importantly, who should believe it? The Sasquatch had survived by remaining legend rather than acknowledged fact. Their future depended on continuing that existence in the shadows of human awareness. Before starting her car, Sarah took out her journal and made a final entry. What happened in the Enchanted Valley will remain there, living in my memory, but not in any form that could compromise the remarkable beings who permitted me to glimpse their world. Some might call what I experienced an attack. My food taken, my movements monitored, my presence tested. But I understand now it was something far more significant. A rare moment of contact across an immense divide of understanding, conducted with more respect than humans often show each other, let alone other species. I came seeking a personal challenge, a way to prove my capabilities despite society's expectations of what bodies like mine can accomplish. I found something far more profound, a reminder that human dominance is an illusion we maintain through carefully controlled exposure to the natural world. Beyond our trails and campgrounds exists a reality where we are neither apex predator nor welcome guest, but merely one form of intelligence among many. I will carry this knowledge with me, not as evidence to convince others, but as a private truth that reshapes how I understand my place in the world. And perhaps someday, when the forests have shrunk even further, and the wild places can no longer hide their secrets, someone will read these words and recognize their own experience, their own momentary crossing between worlds that exist side by side, yet rarely touch. Sarah closed her journal and started the car. As she pulled away from the trailhead, she glanced one last time at the wall of ancient trees that marked the boundary between the human world and something older, something that persisted despite centuries of expansion and exploitation. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw movement among the distant trunks, a large, upright figure raising a hand in farewell. Whether it was reality or imagination hardly mattered. The truth of what had occurred in the depths of the Olympic wilderness would live within her, changing how she perceived everything that followed. Some encounters left physical scars as evidence. Others transformed you from the inside out. Sarah had experienced the latter, an attack not on her body, but on the limitations of her understanding, an expansion of possibility that no photograph or specimen could adequately capture. As she drove back toward Seattle and the familiar patterns of her daily life, Sarah knew she would return to these forests eventually. Not to seek another encounter or to gather evidence, but to honor a connection. that transcended the arbitrary boundaries humans had drawn between themselves and the more-than-human world. In that relationship lay a wisdom older than science, more vital than proof. A wisdom about coexistence that might yet have something essential to teach a species that had forgotten how to live as one among many, rather than lord of all it surveyed. Instead, she took out her journal and began to sketch what she saw, using words and images to capture the essence of the place without the invasive quality of digital photography. As she worked, she became aware that she was again being observed, though more distantly this time. Occasional sounds from the forest edge, soft vocalizations, the rustle of movement, confirmed that her visit was being monitored. After about an hour, Sarah reluctantly prepared to leave. She had originally planned to camp near the waterfall, but now understood that would be an imposition. This was not a public recreation area, but a living space she had been briefly permitted to witness. The proper response was gratitude expressed, through respect for boundaries. As she shouldered her pack, a soft whimpering sound caught her attention. Following the noise, she discovered a young raccoon trapped in a natural pit formed by the roots of a fallen tree. The small animal was clearly distressed, unable to climb the slick walls of its earthen prison. Without hesitation, Sarah set down her pack and, using a sturdy branch as leverage, created a ramp that would allow the raccoon to escape. No sooner had she completed this small act of kindness than a distinctive pattern of knocks echoed from the forest edge, the same communication she had heard earlier, but with a different rhythm. Without fully understanding how, Sarah sensed approval in the sound. She had been tested yet again and had responded with compassion rather than indifference. With a final glance at the magnificent waterfall and the subtle signs of intelligent habitation around it, Sarah turned back toward the trail that would eventually lead her to the human world. She had found what she came for, though it was nothing like what she had expected. Rather than simply a scenic wonder, she had discovered something that challenged the boundaries of accepted reality and her own understanding of humanity's place in the natural order. The journey back was markedly different from her inward trek. Though she retraced her steps along the same physical path, the psychological landscape had been irrevocably altered. She no longer felt like an intruder being watched, but rather a respectful visitor who had been granted a rare privilege. As she walked, Sarah became aware of subtle guidance, strategic placement of broken branches that suggested the optimal route. When the trail grew faint, places where the undergrowth seemed to have been cleared just enough to allow easier passage for her larger human frame. It was as if the forest itself was helping her navigate, though she understood it was actually the work of intelligent beings moving unseen alongside her journey. That night, she made camp in a different clearing than her previous stops, selecting a spot that offered natural shelter beneath a rocky overhang. As she set up her tent, she spoke aloud to the forest, explaining her actions and expressing gratitude for the day's experiences. The verbalization helped organize her own thoughts while acknowledging the beings she now knew were monitoring her journey. "I'm still trying to understand what happened today," she said, as she prepared a simple dinner from her remaining supplies. "Where I come from, most people don't believe you exist. Scientists would demand evidence, photos, DNA samples, recordings. But that would change everything for you, wouldn't it? The quiet life you've built here would be destroyed by human curiosity and greed." A soft rustling in the underbrush seemed to respond to her words. Sarah smiled to herself, no longer startled by these subtle signs of presence. She continued her one-sided conversation as darkness fell, finding unexpected comfort in articulating thoughts she would never have been able to share with anyone in her normal life. Before settling into her tent for the night, Sarah made a decision. Extracting her satellite phone, she deleted the photos she had taken of the footprints and other evidence. While she wasn't ready to erase her journal entries, those were for her own memory, she understood that digital evidence could too easily find its way to the wider world, with consequences she now recognized would be devastating for the beings who had shown her such unexpected grace. As she drifted toward sleep, the now familiar sound of wood striking wood echoed through the forest, first from one direction, then answered by another. The nighttime conversation continued for several minutes, complex patterns that suggested a language beyond human understanding. Sarah listened, not trying to interpret, but simply appreciating the reminder that human speech was just one form of communication in a world filled with intelligence that expressed itself in diverse ways. Sarah watched, transfixed. The encounter defied every warning about wildlife, every protocol for backcountry safety. Yet instinctively she understood that standard rules didn't apply here. This was no ordinary animal acting on instinct. This was a meeting between different forms of intelligence, each assessing the other across a gulf of evolutionary divergence. After sampling each type of food, the Sasquatch made a deep, rumbling sound in its throat that somehow conveyed appreciation. Then, reaching into a kind of natural pouch created by its thick fur near its chest, it extracted something and placed it on the rock beside the remaining food, a perfectly ripe salmon berry, its ruby clusters glistening with moisture. The reciprocal offering left Sarah speechless. This was gift exchange, one of the most fundamental forms of social interaction across human cultures. She inclined her head in what she hoped would be recognized as gratitude, then carefully picked up the berry and ate it. The sweet tart flavor burst across her tongue, somehow more vibrant than any berry she had tasted before. For several minutes, they remained in this tableau, Sarah seated on her log, the Sasquatch crouched by the rock, each studying the other with undisguised fascination. Then, with a series of low vocalizations that seemed directed not at Sarah but at the surrounding forest, the creature rose to its full height. Two more Sasquatch emerged from different directions, one slightly smaller with a darker coat, possibly female, and another that appeared younger, its proportions suggesting adolescence rather than full maturity. They approached with obvious caution, maintaining distance while examining Sarah with evident curiosity. The original Sasquatch made a gesture toward the waterfall trail, then pointed at Sarah, followed by a sweeping motion back toward the direction of the trailhead. The meaning seemed clear enough. She could continue to the waterfall, but then she should return the way she had come. Sarah nodded slowly, wanting to convey her understanding. The waterfall. Then I go back. I understand. The three creatures watched her for a moment longer. Then the largest one made a sound that rose and fell in a complex pattern before turning and melting back into the forest with surprising stealth for something so large. The other two followed, the younger one casting a last, lingering look over its shoulder before disappearing among the trees. Sarah remained seated for several minutes after they departed, her mind struggling to process what had just occurred. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as hallucination, a product of isolation and suggestion acting on her overtired brain. But the half-eaten jerky on the rock and the lingering taste of salmonberry on her tongue were undeniable physical evidence. When she finally rose, her legs trembled slightly, not from fear but from the enormity of the experience. She had just made peaceful contact with a species whose existence was rejected by mainstream science, beings that lived parallel to human civilization yet almost entirely separate from it. She gathered her belongings, leaving what remained of her offered food on the rock, and continued toward the waterfall with a heightened awareness of her surroundings. The forest no longer felt threatening, but instead imbued with a new dimension of wonder. She was a guest here, granted conditional permission to witness one of its treasures before departing. The sound of falling water grew louder as she followed, what remained of the trail around a bend in the terrain. When the trees finally opened up to reveal the waterfall, Sarah gasped audibly. A column of crystalline water plunged nearly 100 feet from a rocky cliff into a deep, emerald pool below. Surrounding the pool, lush vegetation created an enclosed sanctuary of almost supernatural beauty, untouched by human development or interference. But it wasn't just the natural splendor that took her breath away. Arranged around the clearing were subtle signs of habitation. Not human construction, but deliberate organization that spoke of purpose and intelligence. Large stones positioned for sitting. Small structures of interwoven branches that might serve as weather shelters. Paths worn through the vegetation that connected these elements in a pattern suggesting regular use. Sarah realized with a start that she was looking at a Sasquatch gathering place. Perhaps even a rudimentary village of sorts. The waterfall wasn't just a scenic destination. It was a centerpiece of these beings' territory, likely significant to their social structure, and they had permitted her to see it. Moving with careful respect, she found a sun-warmed stone at the edge of the clearing and sat down to absorb the scene. She wanted to document everything, to take photos that would validate her experience, but something stopped her. The Sasquatch had shown trust by revealing this place. Exploiting that trust felt wrong on a fundamental level. The forest had changed subtly as well. The trees here were older, more massive, their canopies forming a cathedral-like ceiling high above. Less sunlight penetrated to the forest floor, creating a perpetual twilight illuminated by occasional shafts of golden light that pierced through gaps in the foliage. The undergrowth was sparser, dominated by ferns and fungi that thrived in the dim, moist environment. Sarah moved with a heightened awareness, her senses attuned to every sound and movement around her. The weight of her pack, the lingering ache in her muscles from 2 days of hiking, and the mental strain of her unsettling encounters had begun to take their toll. Yet she pushed forward, drawn by a mixture of determination and curiosity that overpowered her fatigue. According to her map, the waterfall should be less than a mile ahead, situated in a small box canyon where a tributary joined the main river that carved through the valley. As she hiked, the sound of rushing water grew gradually louder, confirming she was on the right track despite the trail's deterioration. Sarah paused at a small rise to catch her breath and check her bearings. As she consulted her GPS, a flicker of movement caught her eye, something large shifting position behind a distant cluster of trees. Without thinking, she called out, her voice echoing through the quiet forest, "I know you're there. I'm just passing through." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, to her astonishment, a response came, not in words, but in a series of rhythmic knocks, like wood striking wood, from a completely different direction than where she'd seen the movement. Almost immediately, similar knocks answered from yet another location, creating a triangular pattern of sound that surrounded her position. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding. The strategic positioning revealed not just presence, but coordination. Multiple beings communicating and positioning themselves around her. The realization sent a chill down her spine, even as a part of her mind vibrated with academic excitement. If what she suspected was true, she was witnessing behavior that would revolutionize primatology and anthropology, evidence of complex social structure and communication among creatures science refused to acknowledge existed. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sarah made a decision. Rather than continuing to pretend she was unaware of her observers, she would acknowledge them directly. She set down her pack and, moving deliberately, extracted her lunch, a package of jerky, dried fruit, and nuts, spreading it on a flat rock. Like an offering, she then backed away several paces and sat down cross-legged on a fallen log. "I understand this is your home," she said clearly, looking around at the surrounding forest. "I'm grateful to be here, and mean no disrespect. I'm just a traveler hoping to see the waterfall before returning to my world." The forest remained silent for several long moments. Then, from beyond a thick stand of firs about 30 yards away, a branch snapped with deliberate loudness. Sarah held her breath as a massive figure slowly emerged from behind the trees. The sight stole the air from her lungs. Standing over 8 feet tall, covered in thick reddish-brown fur, was a creature that matched every description of Sasquatch she had ever heard, but no description could capture the sheer presence of the being. Its broad shoulders and powerful build suggested immense strength, while its proportionally small head featured a prominent brow ridge shadowing deep-set eyes that regarded her with unmistakable intelligence. Sarah remained motionless, fighting every instinct to flee. The creature made no aggressive move, instead standing at the edge of the trees, observing her with evident curiosity. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only seconds, it raised one massive hand in what could only be described as a cautious greeting. Almost without thinking, Sarah mirrored the gesture, raising her own hand slowly. The simple exchange felt momentous, a bridge across a divide of species and understanding that few humans had ever crossed. The Sasquatch's gaze shifted to the food she had laid out. With surprising grace for its size, it approached the stone, each footfall deliberate and nearly silent despite its massive weight. When it reached the improvised offering, it crouched, a position that still left it looming over Sarah's seated form, and studied the array of trail snacks with evident interest. Using enormous fingers with dexterity that belied their size, the creature selected a piece of jerky, sniffed it carefully, then placed it in its mouth. Its expression, remarkably expressive despite its non-human features, registered something between surprise and consideration as it chewed. "I mean no harm," she said softly, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm just passing through." The shadow froze at the sound of her voice. For several heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, a sound came. In response, not a growl or roar, but a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to contain distinct modulations, almost like speech stripped of recognizable words. Before she could process what was happening, the shadow withdrew, and heavy footsteps receded rapidly into the forest. Sarah remained frozen, bear spray clutched to her chest, until the first tentative bird calls announced that the unknown visitor had truly departed. When she finally gathered the courage to unzip her tent and peer outside, the clearing appeared, undisturbed at first glance. But as she emerged fully, she noticed several distinct changes. The branch from which she had hung her food bag was empty, the carefully knotted rope severed cleanly. Encircling her campsite, pressed into the softer earth near the spring, was a complete ring of the now familiar enormous footprints. Most disturbing of all was a deliberate arrangement near her tent entrance. 3 small, colorful river stones, stacked one atop another in a way that could only be the result of intentional placement. It was an unmistakably intelligent act, a communication of sorts that transcended species barriers. Sarah stood in the center of her campsite, turning slowly, to take in the full circle of prints that surrounded her. The message seemed clear. She had been evaluated, perhaps even tested during the night. But the meaning of the stacked stones remained cryptic, a warning, a greeting, or something else entirely. With hands that trembled slightly, she took photos of everything, the footprints, the cut rope, and especially the stacked stones. Then she checked her pack, relieved to find that while her hanging food bag was gone, her tent-side day pack with emergency rations remained untouched. As Dalos, she meticulously documented the scene. Sarah realized she stood at a crossroads. The rational choice would be to abandon her plan, to pack up and head back to the trailhead and the safety of civilization. Yet a powerful curiosity had taken hold of her, a desire to understand what was happening that outweighed her instinctive fear. Whatever had visited her camp could have harmed her during the night, but had chosen not to. Instead, it had communicated in its own mysterious way, acknowledging her presence in its territory with what almost seemed like ritual. The sun was now rising, casting long shadows through the trees and illuminating the mist that rose from the spring in ethereal patterns. Sarah made her decision. She would continue deeper into the valley, toward the waterfall that had been her original destination. But now her journey had taken on a new dimension. She was no longer simply a hiker enjoying the wilderness, but an uninvited guest being observed, evaluated, and perhaps tested by something that existed on the boundaries between legend and reality. As she prepared a hasty breakfast from her remaining supplies, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed some invisible threshold. The wilderness she had entered as a place of personal challenge and natural beauty had revealed itself to be something far more complex, a realm where human dominance was a mere illusion, and ancient mysteries still moved freely among the towering trees. With the sun climbing higher in the sky, Sarah repacked her gear with methodical precision. The waterfall was supposedly only a few hours' hike away, and she was determined to reach it despite the unsettling events of the morning. Whatever awaited her deeper in the Enchanted Valley, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her through life's other challenges. She took one last look at the stacked stones before shouldering her pack. Whatever had placed them there had displayed not just intelligence but deliberation, a quality Sarah respected, regardless of its source. With a deep breath of the pine-scented air, she set off down the trail, each step taking her further from the world she knew, and deeper into one where the line between mythology and reality blurred with every passing mile. The trail grew increasingly, wild as Sarah ventured deeper into the Enchanted Valley. Sections that had once been clearly maintained were now overgrown, suggesting fewer hikers ventured this far, especially in the off-season. Fallen trees created natural obstacles that required careful navigation, and in some places, the path disappeared entirely, forcing her to rely on her GPS and natural landmarks to stay on course. As she sat on her foam pad, savoring the spicy noodles and the tranquility of approaching evening, a sound rose from deeper in the valley, the same resonant, rumbling call she had heard the previous night. This time, however, it was answered by a similar call from much closer, perhaps less than half a mile away. Sarah froze, her fork suspended midway to her mouth. The calls continued, a series of deep, throaty vocalizations that seemed to contain patterns too complex to be random, animal noises. It almost sounded like communication, with specific intonations and responses that suggested meaning beyond simple territorial announcements. The exchanges continued for nearly 5 minutes before falling silent, leaving Sarah in a state of stunned fascination. Whatever was making those sounds was intelligent enough to engage in what sounded like conversation, and the implications of that were both thrilling and terrifying. With hands that were not entirely steady, Sarah retrieved her satellite phone from her pack. She had promised her sister she would check in each evening, and while she debated how much to share about her experiences, she knew that maintaining contact was a crucial safety measure. The call connected after a series of electronic chirps, Melissa's voice breaking through with the slight delay characteristic of satellite connections. "Sarah, I was getting worried. How's the great wilderness adventure going?" "It's remarkable," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. "The forest here is incredible, unlike anything I've seen before. Any wildlife encounters? Bears? Cougars?" Melissa asked, the concern in her voice evident even through the sometimes patchy connection. Sarah hesitated. "Nothing dangerous. I've seen deer, plenty of birds, some interesting tracks." She trailed off, unsure how to describe what she had experienced without sounding like she had succumbed to forest-induced paranoia. "Tracks? What kind of tracks?" Melissa pressed. "Probably just bear," Sarah lied, unwilling to voice her true suspicions. "Listen, I'm fine. I made good progress today, and I'm camped in a beautiful spot near a spring. I should reach the waterfall tomorrow." They chatted for a few more minutes, Sarah deliberately steering the conversation toward mundane details about the trail conditions and the weather forecast. After promising to call again the following evening, she ended the call and tucked the phone back into her pack. As darkness settled over the forest, Sarah completed her campsite preparations with methodical care. She hung her food bag from a high branch well away from her tent, performed her evening ablutions at a respectful distance from the spring, and made sure her bear spray and headlamp were within easy reach inside her tent. Despite her physical exhaustion, Sleep proved elusive as she lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the forest night sounds. The strange calls did not repeat, but other noises kept her hovering in a state between wakefulness and slumber. Cracking branches, rustling undergrowth, and occasionally, what sounded like heavy, deliberate footsteps circling at a distance from her camp. During one such episode, when the footsteps seemed to draw particularly close, Sarah whispered into the darkness of her tent, "I know you're curious, but please keep your distance. I'm just here to appreciate this beautiful place, not to cause any disturbance." Whether it was coincidence or response, the footsteps receded after her quiet address, fading into the ambient sounds of the nocturnal forest. Eventually, Sarah drifted into a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of being followed through endless trees by something she could sense, but never quite see. She awoke before dawn to absolute silence. The usual pre-dawn chorus of birds was conspicuously absent, creating an eerie vacuum of sound that immediately put her on alert. Something had disturbed the natural rhythm of the forest, silencing its inhabitants in a way that spoke of presence more eloquently than any footprint. Sarah lay motionless in her tent, ears straining to detect any sound beyond the soft whisper of her own breathing. Then she heard it, a deep, snuffling inhalation just outside her tent, as if something large was scenting the fabric mere inches from where she lay. Her heart hammered in her chest, but years of wilderness education had taught her that sudden movements were more likely to trigger aggression than prevent it. Moving with glacial slowness, she reached for the bear spray positioned beside her sleeping pad, wrapping her fingers around the canister in a white-knuckled grip. The snuffling continued, moving along the perimeter of the tent. Sarah could see the shadow of something massive cast against the tent wall by the pre-dawn light, a silhouette too tall and broad to be a bear or any other recognized wildlife from the region. Once on solid ground, she immediately searched for signs of whatever she'd glimpsed. The forest floor was carpeted with needles and decaying leaves, making tracks difficult to discern, but near the base of a massive cedar, the ground was disturbed, in a way that suggested recent activity. Kneeling for a closer look, Sarah found another footprint similar to those near her campsite, though this one was partially obscured as if deliberately scuffed out. "This is getting weird," she said aloud, her voice sounding small beneath the towering trees. The rational part of her brain still sought mundane explanations. Perhaps she was following another hiker with unusually large feet who enjoyed walking barefoot, however impractical that might be on this rugged terrain. Yet the footprints' size and shape defied conventional explanation. Sarah documented this new discovery with her phone camera, then checked her location on her GPS device. She had covered nearly 4 miles since breaking camp and was making good progress toward her intended destination, a secluded spot near a small waterfall that was mentioned in the trail guide as one of the valley's hidden gems. After changing into dry socks and wringing out her boots as best she could, Sarah continued along the trail. The path grew steeper, switchbacking up a ridge that offered occasional glimpses of the broader valley when the trees thinned. During one such break in the foliage, she paused to catch her breath and take in the panoramic view. The valley stretched. Below her, a sea of green undulating in the gentle breeze. From this height, she could trace the silvery thread of the creek she had crossed, winding its way through the forest until it joined a larger river in the distance. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still frosted with the remnants of winter snow. It was breathtaking, worth every ache in her muscles and every moment of uncertainty. As she stood absorbing the vista, a strange sensation crept over her, a prickling awareness that she was not alone in her appreciation of the view. The feeling was so strong that Sarah spun around, half expecting to find someone standing directly behind her. The trail was empty, but the dense wall of forest that bordered it suddenly seemed alive with hidden presence. "I know you're out there," she called, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'm just passing through. I mean no harm to anyone or anything here." Her words hung in the air, met only by the whisper of wind through branches. After a moment of tense silence, Sarah chuckled nervously at her own behavior. And now I'm talking to trees. Great. She adjusted her pack and continued up the trail. But the sense of being observed persisted, a constant companion as tangible as her own shadow. It was not entirely threatening, more curious than malevolent, but the intensity of it was unlike anything she had experienced before. By late afternoon, the trail leveled out along a ridge before beginning a gradual descent toward the heart of the valley. Sarah had been hiking for nearly 6 hours, with only brief breaks, and her body was signaling its need for rest. Her knees ached from the downhill portions, and despite her careful packing, the weight of her backpack had begun to create hot spots on her shoulders where the straps dug in. When she spotted a small clearing beside a bubbling spring, Sarah decided it was time to make camp. The spot was ideal, a natural depression sheltered by a cluster of young hemlocks, with clear sightlines to the trail and a water source close at hand. She shed her pack with a grateful sigh and began the now familiar routine of setting up her campsite. As she worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was performing for an audience. Every movement seemed observed, every sound she made noted by unseen watchers. Rather than succumb to fear, she decided to acknowledge the sensation directly. "I hope you don't mind if I stay here tonight," she said conversationally to the surrounding forest as she hammered tent stakes into the ground. "I'll be gone in the morning, and I promise to leave no trace." Speaking aloud helped calm her nerves, transforming the unsettling awareness into something almost companionable. If she was indeed being watched by some forest creature, be it bear, cougar, or something more unusual, perhaps her voice would establish her as a non-threatening presence. With her tent secured, Sarah set about preparing her evening meal. She had packed more substantial food than many ultralight hikers would consider, but she knew her body needed proper fuel to maintain energy on the trail. Tonight's dinner was a freeze-dried pad thai that she enhanced with extra packets of peanut, butter, and hot sauce, accompanied by a chocolate protein bar for dessert. With shaking hands, she retrieved her phone and took several photos of the prints, including one with her own boot beside them for scale. Part of her wanted to pack up immediately and head back to the trailhead, to the safety of her car and the familiar world beyond. But another part, the part that had driven her to challenge herself with this solo trip in the first place, was curious, even excited by the mystery. After a light breakfast and coffee, Sarah made her decision. She would continue as planned, but with heightened awareness. She had come too far, both literally and figuratively, to be turned back by fear of the unknown. Whatever had left those tracks, be it animal, human, or something science hadn't yet classified, she was equipped to handle the situation with caution and common sense. As she packed up her camp, systematically stowing each item in its designated place in her backpack, Sarah couldn't help glancing repeatedly at the tree line. The sensation of being watched, which she had attributed to her dreams during the night, returned with unsettling intensity. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming the day before, now held a sense of hidden menace. With her pack secured, Sarah took one last look at the strange footprints before setting off down the trail. The path ahead would lead her deeper into the Enchanted Valley, toward territory fewer humans frequented. Whatever had visited her camp during the night might still be out there, moving through the ancient forest on feet that left impressions no wildlife guide could explain. Sarah squared her shoulders and adjusted her pack. She was not easily intimidated, not by steep trails, not by those who doubted her capabilities because of her size, and not by mysterious footprints. With a deep breath of the pine-scented air, she set off into the heart of the valley, unaware that the true test of her courage still lay ahead. The trail began to narrow as Sarah pushed deeper into the Enchanted Valley. The worn path snaked between massive tree trunks and overexposed roots that created natural steps in the steeper sections. Vibrant green moss covered nearly every surface, giving the forest an otherworldly, primeval appearance. Despite the lingering unease from her discovery that morning, Sarah couldn't help but be captivated by the raw beauty surrounding her. Her pace was deliberate, more measured than the previous day. Every few minutes she would pause, not just to catch her breath but to listen intently to the forest sounds around her. The usual chorus of birds seemed subdued, as if the feathered inhabitants were unusually cautious. This subtle shift in the woodland atmosphere only heightened her vigilance. By midday, Sarah reached a swift-flowing creek that cut across the trail. The ranger had mentioned this waterway might be running high due to the spring thaw, and indeed, what was likely an easy rock hop during drier months now presented a more significant challenge. The water rushed over smooth stones, creating a constant, soothing white noise that masked other forest sounds. Sarah studied the crossing, considering her options. About 20 feet across, the creek wasn't particularly wide, but the current looked strong enough to pose a risk if she lost her footing. A fallen log provided a natural bridge several yards upstream, though its surface was slick with moss and spray from the churning water below. "Well, this is why I brought these," she muttered to herself, extending her trekking poles to their full length. She'd use them to probe the creek bed and maintain her balance. Better to have wet boots than risk the mossy log with a heavy pack that could throw off her center of gravity. She tightened her pack straps, ensuring everything was secure, then stepped into the cold water. The shock of it made her gasp, but she steadied herself, planting her poles firmly with each step. The creek bed was uneven, with slippery rocks that shifted under her weight, but Sarah moved with a deliberate caution born of preparation and respect for the environment. Halfway across, a flash of movement on the opposite bank caught her eye. She paused, water swirling around her calves, and squinted against the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something large and dark slip between the trees. But it was gone so quickly she couldn't be certain it wasn't just a shadow cast by a swaying branch. "Hey!" she called out, her voice nearly drowned by the rushing water. "Is someone there?" No response came except for the endless babble of the creek and the soft sighing of wind through the towering firs. Sarah remained motionless for several long moments, scanning the tree line before resuming her crossing with even greater care. The weight of her pack and the force of the current made each step a calculated risk, but soon she was scrambling up the opposite bank, boots squelching with water. This was why she had come. Not to prove anything to the skeptics back home, but to reconnect with this feeling of independence and harmony with the natural world. In her everyday life as a graphic designer, Sarah spent most of her time indoors, engaged with digital landscapes rather than real ones. Out here, the constant background hum of anxiety that accompanied her in the city, concerns about fitting into chairs, navigating narrow spaces, enduring stares from strangers, fell away. The forest didn't judge her size. It only asked that she respect its rules and limitations. As darkness enveloped the forest, Sarah organized her camp for the night. She brushed her teeth at a proper distance from both her tent and her food storage, carefully packing away anything with a scent that might attract animals. With her headlamp illuminating the small clearing, she made a final check of her surroundings before retreating to her tent. Inside, she recorded the day's journey in her trail journal, noting her observations and experiences. She had seen 3 deer, countless birds, and found a patch of early trillium blooming beside a creek. She had passed only 2 other hiking groups, both heading back toward the trailhead, meaning she likely had this section of trail to herself. The thought was simultaneously thrilling and slightly unnerving. Sarah set her satellite phone and emergency beacon within easy reach and nestled into her sleeping bag. Despite the comfort of her gear, sleep didn't come immediately. The forest at night was alive with sounds, the rustle of wind through trees, the occasional call of an owl, and countless other noises she couldn't identify. It was different from the urban soundscape she was accustomed to, but not unpleasant. Just as she was drifting off, a sound jolted her back to alertness. It was a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl but deeper and more resonant than any bear or cougar she had heard on nature documentaries. It seemed to come from some distance away, echoing through the trees in a way that made it difficult to pinpoint. Sarah sat up, listening intently, but the sound didn't repeat. Probably just an animal I'm not familiar with, she reasoned, lying back down. Or maybe it wasn't an animal at all, but the sound of a distant rockfall or tree shifting. The forest created all sorts of acoustical illusions. But as she tried to return to sleep, Sarah couldn't shake a growing feeling of unease. The ranger's comments about unusual activity in the area resurfaced in her mind, along with fragmented memories of the news report she had heard on the drive in. She had always considered herself a rational person, dismissive of the Bigfoot legends that permeated the Pacific Northwest. Yet alone in the darkness, with miles of wilderness between herself and the nearest human, the boundaries between rational thought and primal fear began to blur. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "This is exactly what you wanted, solitude in nature. Don't ruin it by scaring yourself with campfire stories." Eventually, fatigue overcame her anxiety, and she fell into a deep sleep. Her dreams were vivid and strange, filled with shadowy figures moving through trees and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Once, she half woke to what sounded like heavy footsteps circling her campsite, but by the time she became fully conscious, the forest was silent again. She dismissed it as part of her dream and drifted back to sleep. When morning came, Sarah woke to dappled sunlight filtering through the tent fabric. The night's uneasiness seemed foolish in the brightness of day. She stretched within the confines of her tent, her muscles slightly sore from the previous day's hike, but not uncomfortably so. Today would take her deeper into the valley, to areas fewer hikers ventured, especially this early in the season. She unzipped the tent and crawled out, standing to take in her surroundings. The clearing looked different somehow, though she couldn't immediately identify why. It wasn't until she walked to the edge to retrieve her food bag that she noticed the tracks. There, in a patch of soft earth near where the clearing met the denser forest, was a series of impressions that made her blood run cold. Footprints, but not from any boot or shoe. These were massive, easily twice the size of her own large feet, with 5 distinct toe impressions. They appeared human-like in shape, but were too large, too wide, and had a depth that suggested enormous weight. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the prints. Her mind raced through possible explanations: a bear walking on hind legs, someone playing an elaborate prank, her own overtired imagination transforming ordinary animal tracks into something more sinister. But none of these theories seemed to fit what she was seeing. The ranger chuckled, though there was something guarded in his expression. "I'm not saying anything of the sort, just passing along information. Whatever it is, human or animal, practice standard safety protocols. Make noise while you hike, store your food properly, and keep your wits about you." He stamped her permit and handed it back. "And make sure that satellite phone stays charged." "Always," Sarah assured him, tucking the permit into her pocket. "Anything else I should know?" "The spring thaw has left some areas muddy, and there's a creek about 5 miles in that might be running higher than usual. Nothing dangerous, but worth being aware of." He pointed to a map on the wall. "And this bridge here was damaged last winter. They've repaired it, but it's narrower than it used to be." Sarah thanked him and headed back to her car to collect her gear. As she shouldered her pack, adjusting the straps to distribute the weight evenly across her broad frame, she dismissed the ranger's veiled warnings. Every outdoor adventure came with tales of mysterious happenings. It was part of the culture. She was here for the solitude, the challenge, and the beauty of the Olympic wilderness, not to chase folklore. The trailhead was marked by a large wooden sign featuring a map and information about the area's flora and fauna. Sarah took a moment to stretch, her muscles warming up in anticipation of the journey ahead. She checked her GPS watch, confirming the route she had downloaded, then set off down the path that disappeared into the dense forest. The first mile was relatively easy, a gentle slope winding through old-growth forest. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was filled with the rich scent of earth and vegetation, occasionally punctuated by the sweet fragrance of wildflowers that had begun their spring bloom. Sarah moved at a steady pace, her hiking poles providing stability on the uneven terrain. She had been concerned about how her body would handle the trail, but the training was paying off. Months of gradually increasing walks in her local park, strength training sessions at the inclusive gym she'd found, and weekend hikes on easier trails had prepared her better than she'd expected. There was still the occasional twinge in her knees on steeper sections, and she knew she wouldn't be setting any speed records. But the sensation of moving through this pristine environment under her own power filled her with a profound sense of accomplishment. About 2 hours in, the trail began to climb more sharply. Sarah found herself pausing more frequently, her breathing heavier as she navigated switchbacks up a ridge. During one such break, she took the opportunity to shed her outer layer, the exertion having warmed her despite the cool spring air. As she tucked the jacket into her pack, a sound caught her attention, a rustling in the undergrowth off to her right, too substantial to be a small animal. "Hello," she called out, scanning the dense vegetation. "Anyone there?" No response came, but the rustling stopped abruptly. Probably a deer, she thought, though something about the sudden silence felt unnatural. She remembered the ranger's advice about making noise, and began to hum as she continued up the trail, occasionally calling out a cheerful, "Hey, bear!" despite thinking it was likely unnecessary. By late afternoon, Sarah had covered nearly 6 miles, respectable distance considering the terrain and the weight of her full pack. She began to look for a suitable camping spot, eventually finding a small clearing about 100 yards from the trail. It was sheltered by a stand of cedars, with a fallen log providing a natural seating area. The ground was relatively flat and appeared free of roots and rocks that would make sleeping uncomfortable. With practiced efficiency, she set up her tent, a spacious one-person model she had specially selected for its extra width and reinforced floor. Standard backpacking tents were often too constrictive for her size, and she had learned through experience to prioritize comfort over absolute minimum weight. After securing the rainfly, she organized her sleeping system inside. A wide mummy bag rated for spring temperatures and an inflatable sleeping pad designed to support her weight without bottoming out. The day's exertion had left her ravenously hungry. She hung her food bag on a high branch away from her campsite, keeping only the items she needed for dinner. Using her compact stove, she prepared a hearty meal of dehydrated beef stew, enhanced with extra spices she had brought in tiny containers. As she ate, watching the light fade from the forest around her, a deep sense of contentment settled over her. The morning air was crisp and fresh, as Sarah Donovan loaded the last of her gear into her weathered Subaru Outback. She had been planning this solo hiking trip for months, meticulously researching trails, purchasing new equipment, and training her body for the challenging terrain of the Olympic National Forest in Washington state. At 342 pounds, Sarah knew that many would question her decision to undertake such a physically demanding adventure alone, but she had never been one to let others' opinions dictate her life. "You're really going through with this?" her sister Melissa asked over the phone, concern evident in her voice. "Absolutely," Sarah replied, tucking her satellite phone into the side pocket of her backpack. "I've been training for this since January. My stamina is better than it's ever been." "But alone? In bear country?" "Sarah, I just worry about—" I know, Sarah cut in, having heard these concerns countless times. "I've got bear spray, a satellite phone, emergency beacon, first aid kit, and enough supplies for a week, even though I'll only be gone for 3 days. I'll be fine, Mel. I promise." After a few more minutes of reassurances, Sarah ended the call and slid into the driver's seat. The navigation system indicated a 3-hour drive to the trailhead, and she wanted to start hiking by noon. As she pulled away from her Seattle apartment building, a sense of excitement and freedom washed over her. This trip was about more than just experiencing nature. It was about proving something to herself. Sarah had always loved the outdoors, but as her weight increased through her 20s and 30s, she had gradually participated in fewer activities, convinced by societal messaging that hiking and camping weren't for people like her. It wasn't until she discovered a body-positive outdoor group online last year that she began to reconsider these self-imposed limitations. The stories and photos of plus-size adventurers scaling mountains and fording rivers had rekindled a passion she thought long extinguished. As she drove through the suburbs and into the more rural areas leading to the Olympic Peninsula, Sarah's mind drifted to the route she had planned. The Enchanted Valley Trail was a popular destination during summer months, but in late April, it would be relatively quiet. The off-season meant fewer encounters with other hikers, which suited her perfectly. While she had grown more confident in her abilities, she still felt self-conscious about her size when navigating narrow paths or taking breaks more frequently than slimmer hikers. The radio played softly in the background, a news report about strange wildlife sightings in the area barely registering in Sarah's consciousness. Something about unusual activity and forest rangers recommending caution for solo hikers. She reached over and changed the station, opting for some calming folk music instead. She'd done her research and taken all necessary precautions. There was no need for last-minute anxiety. The scenery gradually transformed as she drove, dense suburban developments giving way to scattered rural homes, then thick forests of towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks. The road narrowed and began to wind through the mountains, occasional glimpses of snow-capped peaks visible through breaks in the trees. This was the Washington that Sarah loved, wild and majestic, a far cry from the urban landscape of Seattle. By mid-morning, she reached the small ranger station near the trailhead. A weathered wooden building with green trim, it stood as a gateway between civilization and wilderness. Sarah parked and stepped inside, where a middle-aged ranger looked up from his computer. "Good morning," he greeted, his eyes briefly registering, surprise at her size before his professional demeanor returned. "Heading out for a hike today?" "Yes, planning to spend a few days on the Enchanted Valley Trail," Sarah replied, sliding her permit across the counter. She was used to the momentary reaction and chose to ignore it. The ranger examined her documentation. "3 days solo, huh? You've hiked this area before?" "Not this specific trail, but I've done similar ones." "I'm well prepared," Sarah said, gesturing to her well-equipped backpack. The ranger nodded slowly. "Well, just so you know, we've had some unusual activity reported in that area over the past couple of weeks." "What kind of activity?" Sarah asked, a slight furrow appearing between her brows. "Hard to say exactly. Several hikers have reported strange noises at night, and one group said they found a campsite completely torn apart. Could be a black bear, though the behavior doesn't quite match up." He paused, seeming to consider something. "There have also been a few reports of large footprints that don't appear to be from any known wildlife in the region." Sarah felt a mix of amusement and annoyance. "You're not talking about Bigfoot, are you?"